Usually it's burnout. Burnout is this phenomenon where people become physically and emotionally exhausted. And that level of exhaustion usually derives from their experience in their business. That level of exhaustion causes them to behave differently, right? They're more sarcastic, they're shorter tempered, they're unkind, they're cynical, they make fun of their clients. It's just they're becoming someone who they have not historically been, which is where usually someone that loves them is like, hey, you're not you. You're not doing well. This is not the you I know and love. Can we course correct before it gets really unpleasant for all of us? So usually that's a burnout problem.
Dr. Sherry, you are very welcome to the ScaleX Insider Podcast. Delighted and thrilled to connect with you again.
It's great to be here with you. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Likewise, continuing where we left off in San Diego, which I really, really enjoyed. Listeners, you're in for an absolute treat today. This lady is accomplished in many different areas. But Sherry, our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So as I open the show with this question to all of our guests, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
I love the word intention. Like, what is your intention? What are you going for? So I think we always have the opportunity and ability to choose how we grow, where we grow, how fast we grow. There are a lot of ways that we can turn the dials on up or down or moderate them within our businesses and within our lives. And so I love this idea of scaling with purpose because it invites us to be very intentional about deciding how we do things, how fast and why. Not follow these sort of default stimulus reaction kind of patterns or do things because other people tell us to do them, but do them really for the reasons that come from the inside out.
I love that. Intentionality. That's the second time this week that intentionality has come up in that question. So, I mean, you are so accomplished in so many different areas. Entrepreneurship, authorship, you've authored 2 books now, family life, circus performer, and of course, clinical psychologist. In terms of keeping on that theme of intentionality, you have a clinic specifically addressing the needs of entrepreneurs. So what are typically the entrepreneur's intention when they come to see you? Why do they come to see you?
Oh, great question. People come to me for a variety of reasons. One is their wife or business partner or husband told them they have to. That's one reason. Another reason is that they're facing a big decision, maybe whether or not to exit their business or how to scale their hiring. Like there's something that they're right on the cusp of, and they need a little time and space to think it through with a neutral, objective person, someone who's not in the business or not in their family. And then I think the third reason that people come to me is there's something has happened. Sometimes it's the unexpected death of a business partner. Sometimes it's a major disruption in their business, often around loss or trauma. That's kind of my background as a clinical psychologist, is a focus on loss and trauma. And so when something deeply disruptive happens in a business, I'm a good phone call because I know about that experience from a variety of angles and can help leaders think about how to lead in the midst of crisis.
Let's take each of those 3. So each different frames, I feel. So the first, they've been told they have to.
Yes.
Sounds to me like they're intolerable and that they either go to you or else. So in the context of they have to, what is going on in their lives where they've been compelled by a family member, a partner, a close friend to go and visit you?
Usually it's burnout. Burnout is this phenomenon where people become physically and emotionally exhausted. And that level of exhaustion usually derives from their experience in their business. That level of exhaustion causes them to behave differently, right? They're more sarcastic, they're shorter tempered, they're unkind, they're cynical, they make fun of their clients. It's just they're becoming someone who they have not historically been, which is where usually someone that loves them is like, hey, like this, you're not you. You're not doing well. This is not the you I know and love. Can we course correct before it gets really unpleasant for all of us? So usually that's a burnout problem.
So before we get into the remedy here, I think uh, let's come to the other two, the big decisions. This strikes me as something that I would go and see a coach about,
Yeah.
someone who has been there and done this before, or a mentor, but not typically a clinical psychologist. So tell me why specifically they would come and see you in the context of, your role as a clinical psychologist.
Yeah. I don't really fit neatly in a category because I'm a psychologist. I haven't scaled my own business, but I've been doing this a long time now. And I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs, especially in the SaaS space. And I am married to someone who has scaled and sold several businesses. So I have an element of been there, done that really comes into a coaching framework a little bit more than a traditional clinical psychologist. I think people come to me about decisions. They're not necessarily business decisions, but they're business decisions that have major life implications. So maybe they want to sell their business, but their business partner doesn't. And so they're trying to navigate the relational complication of that. Or maybe they want to scale and go bigger and really pour fuel on the business, but their spouse or their significant other says, you're working too much already. Like, slow down, come home. And so there's a relational, psychological component to the decision. And so they don't want to leave their business partner or their person behind, but nor do they want to be untrue to themselves or to miss an opportunity that certainly is interesting to them. So I would say the decisions where people come to me, the ones that are really juicy that I really love to dive in, are where there's a little bit of like tension between knowing oneself, intention, right? What is my intention? What do I want? What's calling to me? And then the system around them. What feels like the business wants or their business partner or their significant other. There's some kind of tension in those important and key dimensions of life.
I'm going to jump back up to the first one in terms of the burnout, because we have enshrined 10 principles of scaling that undergird every scaling success, certainly in our own experience of scaling and those that we've interviewed over the course of a number of years, in writing our own book and in the research and writing our own book. And the very first principle is actually psyche. It's the psyche of the leader. And certainly we assert that the leader's psyche either empowers or disempowers their scaling trajectory. And what you've cited is this situation of burnout, which is meant not necessarily obvious to the leader themselves, but is obvious to everyone around them. What are the other let's say, characteristics or conditions that you see that characterize disempowerment in the scaling journey? And what I'm curious to get into and dig a little bit into is how we move from kind of disempowerment to empowerment to actually support their scaling journey.
Ooh, this is a giant question. It's really one of the fundamental questions that I spend time on. We are complicated creatures, we humans, and there's so many things that can enter our psychological frameworks that have major implications for the ways that we run our business, including things like our own experience of childhood adversity, including the scripts that we carry with us from our relationships with our parents. I think, entrepreneurs especially want to believe like, that doesn't really matter. Pull myself up from my bootstraps. Like, what matters is right now. I'm in power, I'm in control. But like, oh my gosh, if we don't have a sense of the landmines that live inside of us from our early life experience, we are absolutely in danger of sabotaging ourselves or of acting out of these old scripts that are not relevant to our current scaling processes, but are us trying to tend to our wounds of the past in a very blind and uh, messy way. So I think that knowing yourself as an entrepreneur or as a leader, like really being able to attend to who you are, what you want, what your blind spots are, what your desires are, all of that has significant implication for how you show up in your business. It's relational, it's about drive, it's about what you're trying to prove. Are you really just scaling for fun, for pleasure, uh, for money, or are you trying to prove your worth as a human? Because the implications of those decisions are really different given the motivations behind them.
We've just opened a box here, and I can't put the lid back down on this.
Go for it.
We also assert that you scale a business from the inside out, but
Yeah.
without having the clinical understanding or the experience that you have. Can you share some examples where my experience as a child is now manifesting in a disempowering way in the context of our business? Because our listeners are very practical people. They'll, they maybe listening to this and say, look, and that's too abstract for me, and I kind of disregard it, even though they're experiencing challenges or impediments to their scaling journey right now. What are some of the things that certainly consistently show up from a childhood perspective in the context of now presenting an impediment or a block to scaling?
Right. I wrote about this a bit in my first book, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Keeping Your Shit Together. There's a
Brilliant
couple of
title, by the way.
yeah, it was at the time suggested by my 7-year-old, and I was a little like, where'd you come up with that language? And also good title. So there it is. Um, so I just to be a little bit it's not so scientifically accurate, but I think a useful way to talk about this is to sort of categorize people into some archetypes of the kinds of childhood experiences that maybe they had coming up. One would be like a golden child, someone who was the favored child in their family, maybe a superstar athlete, academically successful, handsome, the apple of their mother's eye, and they just were well loved. I mean, it's the kind of childhood we're trying to create for our kids, really.
You've just described my big brother.
Well, so you know the archetype. And so this kind of person, when they're going to scale their business, they're really the skill of that, the ability of that is that they know how to work a room. They're often very charismatic. They exude a lot of confidence. But the shadow side of that upbringing is that they might not have a lot of experience dealing with haters, dealing with negative reviews, dealing with no's, dealing with doors in the face. And so their ability to find their way through adversity without feeling discouraged is the growth edge for that person. And of course, as you're scaling, you're going to have unhappy customers. You're going to miss things. There are going to be mistakes. There's going to be problems. And if you don't have the sort of psychological resources to be tough and responsive in that scenario, that really may come from your early life experience where like everybody loves me, clearly. What do you mean you don't like my product? So you got to figure that out. Another example may be really the other end of the spectrum where you've got somebody who's grown up in so much adversity, where they were in a family where there was a lot of violence, or they grew up in an environment that was unsafe, and they are used to fighting. They are used to no one caring, no one liking them, and they're good at a fight. But that's also problematic when you come into an adult experience of scaling a business. Not everything is a fight. Some things require nuance, some things require patience, some things require elegance and strategic execution, not just coming in guns blazing every time there's some kind of conflict. Then you might have an archetype of I forget exactly what I called this in the book, but basically the sort of the odd man out or the odd person out. This is your nerdy person. You're like sitting in the back of the room, kind of the wallflower at the dance, who never felt really included in social experiences, but maybe they were off in the corner learning to code or crafting some skill. So they're brilliant at something, but they're not super skilled at interpersonal relationships, and they've experienced a lot of social rejection and social isolation. And this comes up a lot in the SaaS space that I work in quite a lot, is that you can be the best archetype or architect and coder designer in the world, but if you can't interface and understand humans, you don't have a product. Like, you don't have anybody to buy the thing that you're making. And so this psychological wounding of like of being the odd person out, of not being accepted, if that's not navigated, that is going to affect the way that you scale. So if you don't look at that, then you're going to pour all of your resources into product development and none into marketing. You're not going to have a sense of how to land it with the humans. So all of these like imprints of who we are based on our early life experience have like very practical implications for the things that we value within our business and the things that are easy for us and the things that are hard for us and the skills that we come to those challenges with, whether we're a fighter, whether we sort of retreat and go back and work on our product, or whether we like seek to work the room but then fall apart when we experience some negative feedback or critical reviews. So just having the landscape of, this is what I'm good at, these are what my hurts are, this is where I'm still like a kind of fragile little 7-year-old. You know, I know that people that are listening to this don't like this reality, but the truth is that there is a little child still living in all of us. That's internal family systems. It's an introject. It's the like tender part of us. And if we don't acknowledge that and tend to them well, then we risk them taking over and sort of running our business decisions in ways that are highly problematic.
Yeah, what comes up for me when you say that, it's the Aristotle quote of give me the boy until he's 7 and I'll show you the man. Essentially, the programming has happened in childhood
Yeah.
and we continue uh, to act out on that programming in our adult lives. And coupled with that, the Carl Jung quote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call
Yes.
it fate. It's, you know, what you're saying here is so critically important in the context of scaling is know thyself, which speaks directly to our language in terms of you scale from the inside out. So understand your strengths, but with every strength, there's a shadow side. Um, Something I want to come to in this, because uh, I've never had a practicing clinical psychologist in front of me. Are we born with fears, and what fears typically do we take from early childhood that then prevent impediments or bottlenecks or blockers to our scaling trajectory? And when I talk about fears, we can kind of extend that to limiting beliefs.
Mm. I think we're born with some hard-coded evolutionary fears. Fears of fire, of water, of spiders, of snakes, of like things that will kill us. Um, and we're born with a biological sensitivity to reactiveness. Some of us are more neurotic, some are more attuned to fear just on the biological level than other people are. But most of our what you would call self-limiting beliefs or cognitive conscious fears, those we pick up along the way. And as we've been talking about, a lot of them really are picked up in our first like 5 to 10 years of life. I wish that wasn't the case, but it is increasingly. Cognitive neuroscience, a variety of theories suggests that we're really a sponge early in life to take on, how am I valuable? What makes me valuable? What keeps me safe? What puts me at risk? How will my parents love me or reject me? How can I keep up with my siblings? So, our primary fears are around not belonging. That's a just core fear of humans. We're really, if we're 3 years old, we're going to die if we're rejected by the tribe. So we have to be protected by the tribe for the longest of any species in the mammalian kingdom. Like it's 18 years. And even then, we're still really obsessed with belonging. So belonging is a core fear. Um, I think like our place, our usefulness is a lifelong dance that we're doing, like especially in Western civilizations. Who am I and what do I contribute? And will I fail to find a place of belonging and a place of contribution? I think those are fears that really shape how we are in our businesses.
Something you mentioned was the script that we pick up during our childhood. So, someone listening has identified that actually the script that I'm running currently is not necessarily conducive to scaling the business. You know, whenever I'm challenged with a difficult employee or a customer letdown, you know, I go into the team, I let rip, you know, I feel I just explode for 5 minutes. I go back in, I'm okay now, but I've left shrapnel in these people for the next 6 months. Um, you know, as one example, but I now I understand this script is not aligned to where we want to go. What's the process of actually rewriting the script once I'm aware and understand that actually, yeah, this isn't all positive, or this is not empowering. There's some elements of this disempowering. What practically then do we do?
I mean, big celebration to anyone who's good at identifying their scripts, because that is a superpower to recognize, oh, I'm doing this thing, I do this thing, and it's problematic. So identifying the scripts, very, very important first step. I think secondly is understanding the script. What what problem is this script trying to solve? So a big expression of anger is a power move. It's usually from someone's father. It's a very masculine, big expression of, I want it to be different. You will bend to my will, and I will show you with strength, with force, with volume of my voice and the sharpness of my words that I'm asserting my dominance and I'm asking everyone to get in line underneath me. You're not really asking, telling. So that script came from somewhere. What is that script trying to solve? Often that is coming from a place of really uncomfortable vulnerability, of feeling out of control, of feeling like my employees can do whatever they want, and I could easily lose track of the zoo here. And it's the fear of losing control that the script is trying to solve. Could be, for example. So understanding what's underneath the script. And then the magic sauce, step 3, is figuring out how to get that problem solved with a more adaptable script. So we don't just want to throw the script away and be like, that's bad, never get angry, because then we're not resourcing ourselves to solve the fundamental problem in a more adaptive, like pro-social way. Does that make sense?
It does. And you've said that word control. I'm speaking for myself here, and I think on behalf of the entrepreneurial community, we tend to be control freaks.
Yep.
So let's just dig into that a little bit more. What am I after here? Maybe I'm after a kind of we know all of the kind of contaminated scripts. What's the script that we should run here to kind of mitigate against the impact of us being control freaks?
Well, first let's like recast control freak, because I think about entrepreneurs as artisans. Like, you are making something. You are the master craftsperson. And it is your responsibility. Michelangelo wasn't like outsourcing a bunch of work. Like, he was saying, I am the master of this creation. It matters to me. The details matter to me. The way that it's done. I want to have my hands on all of it because I care about it and I love it and because I want to. So there's nothing wrong with that. So let's not call ourselves freaks or, but let's also hold that well. So if nothing else, that's a conversation that you have with your team in our little example scenario is to say, hey, the details really matter to me. It really matters to me how our customer success team responds. It really matters to me how our branding looks like. And so I want it to matter to you. So how do we do that together? Do we need to clarify our SOPs? Do we need to, is this a process problem? Is it a communication problem? But the details are important. So let's get on the same page. Instead of coming in guns blazing, I'm out of control. You feel out of control. I'm out of control and I'm going to punish you. But let's acknowledge, like, I want to be in control as much as I can be. And so, how do I create a system in my business that communicates the importance of the details so that people know what to do?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing there is understanding yourself first and foremost, understanding what you truly value, what is important to you, and ensuring that you're having constructive conversations which articulate and communicate to others what is really important in the context of actually scaling this business and ensuring that we're all aligned on that.
And the truth of who you are. Like, don't judge yourself as a control freak. Like, I want it the way I want it. I'm in charge. That's how it goes. Like, don't judge that, but also be effective in it.
Yeah, I get that. And what I'm curious to understand, given your experience, and I had the privilege of training with you some not directly, but certainly we trained together early in the mornings when we were in the States, and I mean
We're the
you.
only two people up at like 6 in the morning in the gym. Everyone else was sleeping off their hangover. But
They were sensible. Yeah, so I find that the physical exercise is so critically important to me in the context of becoming more emotionally robust to seed mental clarity. And when I have that kind of, and I feel that the mental clarity and the emotional resilience and robustness comes from actually just doing exercise, getting my body moving, which is certainly why I do it. What would you recommend? If there were a number of go to habits, rituals, practices that you would provide as must do's for all entrepreneurs in the context of actually increasing the probability of them being more empowered to support the scaling of their business, what would the go-to practices, rituals, routines be?
our power comes from our ability to regulate our nervous system, right? Our ability to be centered, calm, and control in any condition, no matter what the stressor is around us. So the things that help us to be in a regulated internal system are our relationship with our bodies, our ability to exercise big, to sort of focus, to bring our cells into activation. And then another incredibly important skill is our ability to breathe. Nothing can downregulate an agitated nervous system like breath. So anything that is helping us to be in control of the functioning of our body is going to be super useful to us in our businesses. Um, so exercise would be my first pick. Breath work was right up there. Meditation, prayer, things that help down regulate. Time in nature is a huge like regulation modulator. You can, want to control all the details of your business, but when you're sitting on the side of a mountain or sitting in front of the ocean, you sort of realize your place in it all. And I think that's a helpful reset for most of us. Um, I mean, there's some really important other things that help contribute to nervous system regulation that we don't often think of. And those are things like touch, sex, intimate relationships, romance. We don't think about those as like business hacks, but they are our capacity to be in surrender and release and in connection with another person. There's a whole bunch of research that suggests that our bodies really thrive when we're touched, when we're hugged, when we're just in physical contact with other people. So those kinds of experiences that help us to be fully present, fully integrated, and really in a state of regulation are helpful. One of the things that I have talked about and am a fan of is the use of plant medicines for this purpose. There's a lot of research happening, both, well, really all around the world, especially in Europe and the US, looking at the role of magic or mushrooms, psilocybin, MDMA, LSD, ayahuasca, ibogaine, a variety of different medicines, and the ways that they can be used therapeutically to help really regulate our nervous systems. Sometimes that's in healing trauma, it's in correcting depression or anxiety, and sometimes it's just in really smoothing out the functioning of our neurological systems to be more efficient, to be downregulated or calmer, so that we can face the challenges of scaling or of growing our business with a little bit more ease.
Just on that, and it's a podcast in its own right. I interviewed Brian Keane, wonderful guy, author of multiple books, who has gone on multiple, I think, 11, 12 ayahuasca journeys. And I interviewed him twice. The second time we went deep into his own ayahuasca journey. For someone who is experienced in breath work, what's a sensible next step, kind of short of going for the full ayahuasca ceremony? What's a next step that's actually um, conducive to feeling more empowered in the context of ultimately increasing the probability of them being more successful in their business?
I mean, I think a nice level up from a proficient breathwork practice is to then combine it with more physical stimulation. So sauna and cold plunge in a way of really regulating breath with a bit more of a stimulus is a really good practice. Even some high intensity yoga where you are still really present with breath, but your body has some external load on it, some demands. Um, those are those are increased physical practices that don't get into full on non-ordinary states. So when we're talking about plant medicine, we're often talking about shifting the default mode network or the way that our brains function by putting it in a different state. We call it a non-ordinary state. But breath work can accomplish some of the same things. And then when you apply breath work in different scenarios, then you are taking yourself out of the regular routines of your physiology as well as your schedule and your sort of daily life, and allowing your system, your brain, your body, your soul to be in a variety of different environments in a way that you're, forcing yourself to respond in real time. Um, I did a really interesting meditation practice, and I'm not a gun person, but this was a meditation at gunpoint where we were invited to do a meditation and breath practice and then shoot at a shooting range. This was like the first time I fired a weapon, and sort of the pre-post experience of like deep meditation really increased my accuracy, which is the hypothesis, right? A down-regulated nervous system, breathe, focus, align, shoot. Really different than like step up there and try. So taking the skills of breath work, of calming, and applying them in a variety of different environments just enhances your regulatory control over your internal systems.
There's so much in all of that. And I'm glad you clarified what meditation at gunpoint meant. I had a picture of you here in lotus pose with somebody pointing a gun to your head saying, meditate. We want to see you getting into parasympathetic state here. Hurry up. So glad you clarified that it was to increase your focus in terms of the accuracy. And we had ex-Navy SEAL Mark Devine on the show. Um, who is a huge practitioner and coach around box breathing, the practice of box breathing. And it's something that we guide participants in our own program on for every mastermind and every workshop. And I can certainly testify to the benefits of breath work. I'm a Wim Hof method instructor now because of the profound impact that actually the Wim Hof method breathing has had in my own life. And having been guided by Wim, by the time you're 6 or 7 rounds in, it's quite powerful. So, shifting gears for a moment, I want to come to your wonderful new book. For those listening, you won't be able to see me show up. It looks resplendent, actually, with my black background, but exit strategy. It's something that we don't tend to talk about on the show, mostly focused on the starting up, the scaling up, but rarely the selling up. So
that kind of surprises me. Like, why?
yeah,
Why scale and then have no
well,
plan?
and it's a really good question. And so let's come to that. When should we start thinking about exiting our business?
Ideally, right at the very beginning. I
Tell
mean,
me about that.
yeah, like know yourself. Like, what kind of entrepreneur are you? Do you want to build and scale something in 18 months or 3 years, make a big pile of money when you sell it? Is that what you're about? Do you want to build a legacy company that you run for 40 years and pass on to your children? Those are very different paths. And having a bit of a sense of, I made it a little bit binary, but like, what kind of entrepreneur are you? What kind of business are you building? What's your energy for that business? What's your perspective of the longevity of that business? You're going to scale really differently if you're like looking to turn that over in 3 years versus 30 years.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's something we do say to the participants on our own program. I mean, ultimately, you are going to exit your business at
One way or
someday.
another.
Absolutely, you're going to exit this planet someday. So
Yeah.
ultimately, by virtue of exiting the planet, you're going to exit your business. It's much more prudent to have that business exit planned.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hearing you say, Sherry. So we should do that right at the outset. And I mean, is this a case of, look, I'm starting and scaling this business for a very successful exit, a significant liquidity event, and really that's my motivations here, or a legacy event here where I want to build an incredible business. I'm potentially a second generation leader, or I'm first generation, but I have a family and I want to pass this business down onto my family members. Are there any other situations there, that for those who are listening should consider in terms of where they fall into, the category that they fall into?
I mean, there's all kinds of middle ground there. I mean, I think a lot of this conversation really has to do with what else is happening in your life. So, maybe you're raising young children and it's really helpful for you to have like a steady kind of predictable business during the time that your kids are young, and then they turn 18 and they go off and you want to be done. Maybe you want to retire at 50 and be able to go hang out on the beach in Mexico. So this sense in which what's going on in your life, what are your motivations? And money is not the only motivation, as you know. Sometimes it's impact, sometimes it's prestige, sometimes it's power and influence. Like, I want to have a brand that's a household name. That's a very different goal than I want a pile of money. So really understanding what your motivations are, what the other factors in your world are, and who are the other players. Do you have a business partner? Do you have multiple business partners? What is your sort of exit strategy planning around them? What if one of you wants to exit before the others? Like, these are really important conversations to really have at the beginning. It's kind of like a prenup for your business. Um, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't have those conversations because they're so focused on starting and growing that they aren't really thinking about an ending for one or any other partners involved in a business. And that's where a lot of tangle and complexity can happen midway through when there's not clarity around or not operating instructions around some of those tricky moments.
Something you mentioned there is the power and influence piece. I mean, we certainly encourage the leaders in our program to not become overly identified with the business in the context of, I am the founder of
Yeah.
XYZ Limited, or I am the CEO of this business, and my entire identity is wrapped around this. We encourage leaders to understand or certainly frame the fact that even though they may own this company or own a significant share of this company,
Yeah.
that they're in service of it, and distinguish between their role potentially as CEO and also the fact that actually they're a shareholder of this business. But we bring them into our community as in the frame of CEOs in service of this organization, and to create an organizational vision that they aspire or certainly are intentional about outlasting them, and to be aware that at some point in this journey, the organization, and they certainly hope that the organization outgrows their ability to service its needs appropriately in terms of the role that they're currently in. That's what we
Yeah.
ask them to adopt in terms of the mindset.
Which is the psychological and structural underpinning of a good exit.
Right. So
So
let's
you're preparing people for an exit without maybe just like using that language because that's what must be in place. Some psychological separateness from the business so that the owner is not so deeply intertwined with the business, and the structural separateness. How does this business run without you?
So to me, the byproduct of that psychological awareness and that psychological frame, which is a healthy one, ultimately, there's no downside to that. It not only supports them in building value in this organization that will outlast them, and an organization that is not dependent on the founder by virtue of its independence becomes inherently more valuable to others, and also creates more emotional safety for the actual founder themselves. So what I'm hearing is that there's actually no downside to this.
No, no, I can't think of a downside. I mean, I think there's just so much upside for the entrepreneur, for their family, for their own mental health to have separateness. And it's harder than it sounds because um a lot of us, for reasons that we sort of talked about earlier in our conversation, have some old scripts around self-importance, codependence, like we secretly don't want our business to be able to run without us because that makes us expendable. I mean, there's some like deep, juicy fear that can live underneath that scenario. But on paper, what you and I are completely in alignment about what this looks like for founders to set up their world and their business in a way where they have more autonomy. And of course, the upsides are like you get to go on vacation, like you get to have a life outside of your business. You get to have some mental health and mental wellness because your psyche isn't strapped to the up and down roller coaster of whatever's happening in the economy and impacting your business in a variety of ways. There's some emotional distinctiveness, which is extraordinarily important.
Yeah, I love that term, emotional distinctiveness, and the separateness as well is a wonderful word. What steps do you encourage for those listening who are hearing this for the first time and may not even have been aware that their identity is so wrapped up in their business? Everyone knows them. If they don't know them by name, they know them as the CEO of the business. They know them as the founder of this business. They're, people typically interact with them in the context of their role within this business. Um, what steps should they take or begin to take practically to start this journey of separateness?
One way that I think about this is kind of diversifying your investments. And that's a fancy way to say, get a hobby. Have something else that you love in your life that you pour fuel on. Um, that, of course, for many people is also family and relationships, but I think there's a selfhood nature of being able to do something that you just love to do and allowing yourself to play and spend time in something that gives you a lot of life that's not your business.
Yeah, makes complete sense. Um, and that ultimately sounds like to me that would provide the bridge to a much happier retirement
Post-exit life, yeah.
post exit life. Yeah. So in the context of the post exit life, does this always end well? You know, we've started this business, we've scaled this business, we've got like life changing money. Is that us now merrily into the sunset? Job done. I'm gonna live a wonderfully happy life forever after here.
I wish. I wish. Really, the reason that I wrote this book is because I have encountered so many mid and post exit founders who are just a mess, like in a pretty serious level of psychological implosion. Um, there's a lot of things about exiting that are very difficult. The process is very difficult. It's very time intensive. This thing that you've spent your life making is under deep, deep scrutiny. I mean, it's just, the process itself is really quite terrible. But then you get to the end, and as humans, when we go through big transitions, big threshold moments in our lives, the transition from high school to young adulthood, for example, or the transition from not married to married or not parenting to parenting, even from working to retirement, these are big, like, reshuffling metamorphosis kinds of moments in our lives. But we go through those moments with a lot of cultural parameters. We have graduation parties, we have baby showers, we have these kind of rituals around them. And we often go through them with a cohort. My child went off to college, and the friends of all of my children's friends, like they also went too. And so I'm talking to the other parents about, like, oh my God, where's your kid going? And what are you doing in their room? And it's so sad. And we're all grieving together. But everybody is doing that together. And that's the thing that I think is really different for exiting entrepreneurs, especially if they're not 65 or not 70, is that they're going through this major metamorphosis with no community, with no ritual, and with very little understanding on behalf of the culture around them about what it takes to detach yourself from the thing that's brought you meaning for most of your adult life. And it's a very isolating experience for people. And it triggers all kinds of these old scripts that you and I have been talking about. Like, people will say, I need to prove I can do it again. I need to prove this wasn't a one-off, that I'm not like a one-hit wonder band, but I'm someone who is an entrepreneur, and I have to prove that through repeated successes, which is really just a vanity play. Like, if you were successful and you made $15 million, like, take the money and run. Like, you don't have to prove anything to anybody. But there's still this script about identity that lurks there. Or people just struggle with the lostness of, what do I just do with myself now? Maybe they have a lot of money, but no meaning and no sense of, like, how to fill their days productively, which is a really challenging thing for somebody who's deeply motivated, deeply disciplined, and maybe like 42 years old. So there's a lot of psychological complexity to this process. And it is very important to one, have a cohort or a community of other entrepreneurs who, if maybe they're not going through the same exit process at the same time, they at least have a framework for what you're experiencing. And two, it is really important to have this sort of diversified sense of self, that there is more than one thing that matters to you in your life, so that when that one thing changes, you aren't completely psychologically blown open. And that's true of lots of things, right? You don't want just one relationship in your whole life. Like you want friends, you want a variety of relationships so that you have love and connection if that one person leaves or dies or whatever. We want to be a multiplicity. We want to have flexibility in what matters to us.
Makes complete sense. And there's the other added piece of complexity to all of this is you ain't getting any sympathy if you're running around with $15 in the
Poor
bank
little
from
rich
anyone else.
guy.
But yeah.
Yeah, totally. Rich people, first world problems.
Yeah. There isn't too many people shedding tears for you. Um, and there aren't too many clubs that you can go to where you've got, a
Some
room full of people
compassion.
who have exited similarly. So
Yeah.
certainly in a small group. But you've hit on something there, which is the loneliness piece. And moving back just to prior to the exit piece, I often I found this myself and certainly find it with other entrepreneurs who are scaling. They spend a lot of time in their head. It seems like a dichotomy that you've got. How can you be surrounded by so many people but yet be lonely in the context of, you've got a big team, you've got lots of customers, you're interacting every day. W- You know, how can you be lonely? So can you speak to that? Is this something that you experience a lot in your own work, Sherry, in terms of dealing with the loneliness of being a leader of a scale up?
Scaling business. Yeah. Just being around people doesn't mean connection. And I think many people who are running large teams or businesses that are flourishing and full and busy spend a lot of time with people, but in every one of those relationships are all non-reciprocal, meaning there's a power differential. If you're the leader, you're in charge. Like your decisions have deep implications for other people's lives. You have a responsibility to that person. And even if you're hanging out and enjoying a good lunch together or playing darts in the office after work, like there can be play and there can be connection, but there's still non-reciprocity. And when we have lots and lots of those non-reciprocal relationships, we're not really seen. We're not really known as a human. Our vulnerability, our preferences, our idiosyncrasies aren't really known by our employees, nor should they be. That's not what that relationship is. But because we invest so much time in our teams, we're probably struggling to really invest in those flourishing relationships with reciprocal friendships. And because we are so used to there being a little bit of a power differential of us holding the responsibility for steering the ship, we're not used to taking the mask off and saying, this is who I am. This is where I'm struggling. And so we don't, even in our friendships where that might be available, or our relationships with our romantic partners where that might be available, we're not practiced at being in those reciprocal, here's who I am really kind of moments. So again, being surrounded by people is not being known, is not the giving and exchanging of love and care that really is what we're needing in most cases.
Oh, that's so clear. You've described that so wonderfully well. It resonates so strongly. What would you recommend then to leaders who have aspirations to scale? What's some of the kind of the scaffolding of support that they should have around them, again, to empower them and increase the probability of them being successful in the context of their own vision?
Yeah. It's a set of people. It really is. I mean, I think it's really important for scaling entrepreneurs to have relationships and friendships with other scaling entrepreneurs. So whether it's in a cohort group that you're leading, in a kind of entrepreneur group in which we met, MMT, like places where like they can talk shop and be seen and like really say like, hey, what are you doing about this? I'm not sure what to do about this. What are you doing in your company about this? So those are peers. And then I think it's really important for entrepreneurs to keep some friendships outside of entrepreneurship. Maybe that's with other parents on the soccer team, or if you're raising children, it's with people that you knew back in high school. It's with people who like don't really care about any of it. And that sounds like it might not be important, but I think it's really important because it also helps to reinforce this sense of like you are not your business. So people who just think you go to a day job like everybody else and you're, doing bar trivia with on Friday nights, like you need those people in your life too, who just aren't in it for the glory and the grandeur of your entrepreneurial journey. I mean, obviously, having a healthy relationship with your romantic partner is essential to all aspects of our relationship, but having a business does put an extra dimension or an extra strain on that relationship. It really is, if you'll pardon the term, like sort of like being in a throuple. Like you've got this primary human couple, but one of the members of that couple is in this deep relationship with this business. And so the dynamics of that are pretty tricky. And having really open conversation with your romantic partner, your spouse about that is essential. Which is going to bring me to, of course, the not surprising recommendation that scaling people be in some kind of like deep level coaching or therapy. Because when the stakes are high, you're like a performance athlete. Your mindset has to be on point. And any deviation from that, any kind of blip back into old scripts has a lot of implications, especially when you're going really fast. And so keeping your mindset highly attuned, staying really on top of it, usually requires the objective observance of a third person, of somebody outside of you, of outside of like the myopic focus on your business. So that can take many forms. Clearly, I'm a fan of psychologists, but having somebody who just knows how to help keep you oriented to your North Star is essential.
Oh, that wisdom is so wonderfully practical. I feel we've covered a lot in the last hour. The psychological challenges which scaling entrepreneurs actually encounter, having a level of awareness to those, understanding your internal script, acknowledging that there will be childhood childhood situations, childhood conditioning, childhood trauma that will play out in adult life, which will manifest within your business in some way or another, acknowledging that. In the context of exiting your business, really clear in terms of that should be planned right now. If you haven't thought about this, use this episode as a reason now to begin thinking about your exit, because you will exit, and it's prudent that actually you're leading this business, potentially hundreds if not thousands of people impacted by you either planning or not planning. There'll be ramifications for both. So what we're suggesting here and appealing to you to do is to plan this, address some of the challenges there that you will go through, or certainly heighten, shone a light on the challenge that is that exit process, and then the transition to post-exit life. Is there anything before we move into the close, Sherry, that we haven't covered off that you feel is necessary in the context of the startup, scale up, and sell up journey?
I think just to reiterate the word that we began with, which is intention, and to remind people that like you get to live your life in the way that you want to live it. And it is a custom design job. So just being aware in any place in your life, in relationships, in scaling, in business, where you feel pulled into an old script or to following uh, the direction and the inertia of something that's not really from the inside out. So I think you and I are very aligned on this inner work first. And from that flows all of the magic of what we're able to do as business owners and as humans.
Yeah, lovely. I think this might play into my closing question. Can you share with our audience three timeless takeaways
From our conversation or from like
from
my
any
life and
from I
knowledge of the
mean
world?
absolutely, which is much wider than I suspect the majority of people listening to the show.
Yeah. I think one thing that I really deeply believe is that play is medicine, and that when we are in play, it's some of the best moments of our life that can fuel all the other things. So, play is just doing things because we want to, because they bring joy and satisfaction. So, letting that be really important, I think, is essential. Um, I think another takeaway that feels maybe important to mention is to really attune to the emotions of our lives, especially things like grief, some of the harder to process, shadowy experiences that live inside of us in tenderness. Again, as entrepreneurs, as like go getters, as people who are scaling, we think about big and go and out there, and we don't always have the tenderness and the quiet for the parts of us that are inside or are hurt or are sad. Um, but the ability to grieve well is kind of like keeping a clear slate, a clean ability to move in the world because we're not carrying a lot of baggage and wounding with us. So attend to the wounds quickly, effectively, tenderly, thoughtfully, so that we can be free to move and go. I think the last thing that I would say, the last takeaway is just playful out. Like, what an incredible opportunity we all have to be living in the lives that we're living and to be running the businesses that we're running and using these amazing brains that we have and living in the bodies that we're living in. And so I think every day is an opportunity to just kind of like lavish ourselves in gratitude and the ability to like come to the game field of our lives and just go big and have a great fucking time and take nothing for granted and hold nothing back.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. Thank you. Thank you for an incredible conversation. Um, if people are not familiar with your work, where best can they find out more?
My company is called ZenFounder. So I have a podcast. I've written 3 books. Um, and I do a lot of one-on-one work with entrepreneurs and sometimes work with their teams. So zenfounder.com is the best place to find that. And if people are curious about my life as a circus artist, that's at touching2worlds.com.
That's incredible. Touching2worlds.com. Speaking of which, what is next for you? Because I mean, talk about playing full out. It's just this incredible life that you're living. What are you up to now, and what's next?
Well, in the next month, I'm producing a circus show for hopefully up to 600 people who will come to a show that I write and then I co-produce with one of my coaches, and we have 20 artists and host a bunch of people in our community to really explore the relationship between movement and mental health. So it's delightful. It's really a fun thing to do. And then shortly after that, I'm going on a 2 week European adventure with my husband and 2 kids. My husband and I are celebrating our 25th wedding
Oh,
anniversary. So we've
congratulations.
been playing
Wow.
full out for a long time and we're bringing our teenagers with us. So we'll see how that goes.
What, did you get married when you were 15 or something?
Yeah, yeah, totally. I was a child bride.
Well, look, I wish you every success in everything that you're doing. It was incredible to connect in San Diego. This has been a wonderful continuance today. Your this conversation is packed with so much wisdom. It's one I'm going to come back and listen to time and time again. Good luck with the new book. Good luck with the I love that the connection between movement and mental health, so critically important. Obviously, you've played full out. It's not everybody's going to move from trapeze ropes to trapeze ropes, but you you're clearly playing life full out, and I wish you a wonderful break in Europe. If you happen to be in Ireland, please get in touch. But look, in the meantime, thank you for today. Take care.
Thank you.